year 2000, when my sister Carol Green sent me a brochure from the Oak Ridge Environmental Peace Alliance. It was just like an FYI, I just joined this board, but when I read that Oak Ridge, Tennessee has the last fully operational nuclear weapons production facility, that really caught my attention. And I thought, wow, you know, I thought we'd stopped building those. Well, those words were written by Ralph, and that led me to a 10-year set of adventures based on his guidance. It's not only his wisdom, knowledge, and skills as a grassroots organizer, he's a writer, musician, video and now skit writer, he's a Presbyterian minister, researcher, father, and the list goes on. He's a wonderful singer. And that helps draw thousands of people from around the world to the REPA events. It's also, the bonus is his sense of humor that doesn't miss a chance to disarm, lighten, and to bring joy, love, trust, and compassion to the long, often discouraging campaign to stop the production of new U.S. nuclear weapons, especially the Y-12 National Security Complex, which is what we're primarily talking about. So, for that, grateful and honored to not only have been able to work with you these 10 years, but also be your friend. So without any further words, let us give a round of applause to REPA's coordinator, Ralph Hutchinson. Welcome, thank you.
Kim. And some of that, even what she said, was true. Normal language of the Senate, it's the safety, reliability, and performance of the United States nuclear arsenal. Why that's important is the only way we're going to be sure of the performance of our nuclear stockpile as we work on these weapons and we modernize them and upgrade them. The only way we're going to be sure about performance is how? We test them. The United States hasn't tested a nuclear weapon, a full-scale nuclear test, since 1993, and there has been a de facto moratorium on nuclear testing. But the United States is heading down that road as it moves into an aggressive modernization program. What does it mean to modernize our nuclear arsenal? Well, the first thing it means is, and I had a handout sheet on the registration table, I don't know if you picked it up, but you can get it on the way out. It means we're going to build 3 new bomb plants. One of them is in Los Alamos, New Mexico. One of them is in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And one of them is in Kansas City, Missouri. And the reason we have 3 new bomb plants is because they cover the 3 major essential pieces of a thermonuclear weapon. In Los Alamos, they want to make the plutonium pits. In Oak Ridge, they make the highly uranium secondary, which is the thermonuclear part of the bomb. And in Kansas City, they make the non-nuclear electronics parts that cover the fusing and the arming and the firing mechanisms for the thermonuclear weapon. In these 3 bomb plants, with a price tag of between $10 and $15 billion, these 3 bomb plants will not only reconstitute the entire U.S. capacity to produce thermonuclear weapons, but they will expand our capacity to produce nuclear weapons. Curiously enough, all 3 bomb plants are sized with the capacity to produce 50 to 80 warheads per year. At 80 warheads a year and start treaty levels that are below 1,600, it means we'll be able to rebuild our nuclear arsenal every 20 years. The whole thing will be able to rebuild it every 20 years. We don't need to do that. Even if you want nuclear weapons and you want to make sure they're reliable, the government has independent scientific experts who have certified that they're reliable from anywhere from 45 to 85 years before you even have to think about a deterioration because of an aging problem in our nuclear warheads. But that's not good enough. We want the capacity to bring a full new nuclear arsenal online every 20 years. The price tag for that, the Republicans, as part of the START treaty ratification, are demanding that the Obama administration make a commitment of $80 billion over the next decade to the modernization of the U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile. But you know what? I found this interesting reading John Burroughs' article this morning. The commitment they want of $80 billion, but when the Obama administration submitted the nuclear posture review, over the next decade, the United States will invest well over $100 billion in nuclear delivery systems to sustain existing capabilities and modernize some strategic systems. So this is the road that we're on. Not the road they're thinking about going down, but the road that we're on right now is $80 to $100 billion over the next decade to modernize and to establish a robust program to assure the performance of our nuclear arsenal. It's about nuclear policy and what is going to happen in the future, happen at many levels. And at each of these levels, there's an opportunity for us to engage and to be part of this debate. Now, I doubt that any of us is going to be invited into the White House to talk about this at the cabinet level with the president and his top advisors. So maybe not at all the levels that are out there, but there are ways in which we can influence administration policy. I believe the woman who stood up at Obama's town meeting last week and told him how disappointed she was because she had voted for change, and they weren't feeling the change and they weren't seeing the change. It was a very powerful thing that she did for the President of the United States. And I believe ultimately will have some impact on the way policy moves forward in this country because it was broadcast over and over again on the national news. Obama doesn't get to ignore that. So there are ways in which, and we can always write to the President, we can write to his advisors, we can write to the State Department. The President sets the broad parameters of our policy, but other people work out the details, and sometimes you wonder what they're thinking of. But the President, of course, said his vision of a world free of nuclear weapons, we may not get there in our lifetime, he said. Hillary Clinton, at the conclusion of the START negotiations, gathered her State Department staff around her to congratulate them for a job well done. And in her speech, she said, we're moving toward a world free of nuclear weapons. We may not get there in our lifetime or in successive lifetimes. So one step down from the President now. This is the Secretary of State, but it's this one step toward implementation of his policy. And at the State Department level, we're not planning on doing it in Sasha or Malia's lifetime either. We're moving to successive lifetimes now. So in the Senate, the Foreign Relations Committee has reported out the START Treaty. It's not clear when it will come to a vote on the floor of the Senate, but it is clear that now is the time to be contacting our senators and pressing them to vote to ratify the START Treaty as a clean treaty without money for new weapons production plants. It doesn't take a genius. It doesn't even take a fifth grader's education to understand that if on the one hand you are saying you're bringing your stockpile down, on the other hand you're investing $100 billion in new bomb plants, these are not reconcilable goals. These are contradictory. And only one of them is actually going to influence the future. And it's not going to be dropping your arsenal from 2,000 to 1,500, which is still, in the words of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, when they went out on the Sunday morning talk shows to sell the START Treaty, she said, we have way more bombs than we can ever think of needing at START levels. So the purpose of the START Treaty at this point is not so much to reduce the stockpiles down to anything that's approaching seriously talking about nuclear abolition or disarmament. It is to guarantee $100 billion for the nuclear infrastructure in the next decade. Finally, so the Senate is going to vote to ratify the treaty. The Senate and the House are also going to be looking at budget numbers coming up. And every time they look at the budget, they need to hear from their constituents about how we want the money spent in this country. And they don't just need to hear from the Tea Party people. And then the other level at which we can all be working is at the local level, because the decisions that are made about nuclear weapons policy in this country are not made by military leaders. They're not military decisions. The military doesn't even have a use for our nuclear weapons. They've fought several wars since we became a nuclear-armed state, and they've never used a nuclear weapon in their war, and they know that they don't have a realistic military plan that includes using a nuclear weapon. It's not the military that's driving this. It's the economics and the politics that are driving this. And so that's the level at which we can do something about it. And in order to have an impact, then we have to build a political base. That's what the Michigan Stop the Nuclear Bombs campaign has been doing for the last 10 years, and doing very well. For a community that doesn't have a bomb plant in your immediate backyard, you're the most organized community about nuclear weapons that there is in the United States of America. Absolutely. And so the last thing that I want to say is I have been participating in these discussions at different levels. I sometimes go to Washington when all the nonprofit and arms control NGO, non-governmental organizations gather to talk about how are we going to do this and what's the next step and what's our strategy and what's our message and all those kind of things. And over again, the talk is technical, the talk is policy, the talk is strategic. The talk is never about the morality of nuclear weapons. There is a huge, deafening silence now about the morality of nuclear weapons. And it's interesting to me because in the very first weeks and months and years, as the people in the United States began to understand what Hiroshima and Nagasaki meant, and it wasn't immediate because a lot of the information was held from us. But as we began to understand that, the first voices to raise questions were moral voices. Even among the scientific community and the people who designed and built the bomb, the petition to Truman was based fundamentally on the moral premise that we are entering a new arena of morality with thermonuclear weapons, and one in which human beings don't have the right to go to use these weapons on other human beings. There are a number of ways to cut the morality now, not just the destruction of the planet, the utter contempt for human life and all life of nuclear weapons, but also, even if you're not using them, the spending of trillions and trillions of dollars on nuclear weapons, which is, as Dwight Eisenhower said, the theft of a slice of bread from a child who is hungry. It's also the theft of education from our children and the theft of health care for a number of our people. And all of these things are ways to look at this morally. We need to hear the moral voice, and we're the people who are positioned to do that. And the question of whether or not this should even be happening is never raised at all. It's time for us to raise that voice again. It became a strong and powerful voice in the early 1980s with the Freeze movement. And it was a voice that had a difference in the nuclear future of this country. And I believe that voice needs to be raised again. We shouldn't be afraid of doing it. We should realize we are the missing piece. Gandhi says everybody has a piece of the truth, and we'll never get the whole truth until we bring all the pieces together. So for us to abdicate that piece of the debate and allow the debate to be about defense and force structure and deterrence and mutually assured destruction and the numbers in a stockpile, and not have that debate include the ultimate question. Is this an endeavor in which humankind should be engaged? Is not something that we can allow to happen. We just can't abdicate that. We have to do it. So my encouraging word is there is something that every one of us can do. A lot of people feel this in their hearts, but the second word of encouragement is you are in a community that will support you as you raise the moral voice and begin to take stands and be heard again. And that's an important thing because it's almost impossible to sustain this voice and this activism if you're all isolated or by yourself. And the third thing I would say is that history needs you, and they need to hear you now. So I encourage you to be active and to be vocal and to be firm and strong because we know the direction that the world needs to go. It won't get there unless we push and pull and tug. Thank you.